Hey, I'm going to talk about the wage gap and why we have a gender wage gap. And then I'm going to explain to you all the most important factors that influence the wage gap. So, not all of them, but the most important ones. There are probably 20 or 30 that I know about. First of all, I'm going to say that just because something is created a certain way, it doesn't mean that these are the moral guidelines that we have to follow. So, as Richard Dawkins says, is not ought. Just because something is that way doesn't mean that it should be that way, or that we should accept the natural state of things more than the arbitrary state of things. So, in psychology, we work with these instincts groups, as you see here on this page. So, I suggest to you that you study these instincts and then see what kind of psychology fields we have. So all these instincts are of course always gene-environment interaction, but all of these instincts are universal and you can find them in any group. And this is again another illustration of the gene-environment interaction. So here you can actually study what kind of influence the parent have on their child and what kind of influence genetics have on the child, like heritability, and then non-shared environment. So as you can see here, heritability is a huge influence on several factors. Intelligent is about 80% heritable when you become an adult. When you're a child, it's not as heritable. Then the parents' influence are actually somewhat noticeable. And then you have personality, that's 50% heritable. And stuff like height is 80% heritable. And this summary of ratings I have from the great book called Personality Psychology. It's written by David Buss. And I really suggest you read this book if you are in any way interested in psychology. This is one of the several graphs in the book, or several statistics. As you can see here, we have several universal differences between men and women. So these are found in any kind of society. And you can read more about it, like what kind of differences do we have specifically. It seems like men are more aggressive and women are more caring, universally. Another way to study sex differences, besides observation and besides questionnaires, is looking at the brain. So we have different kind of brain modules and we have different sizes of brain modules and different neurotransmitters and different kind of neurotransmitters in certain areas, and we can scan the brains while a certain gender is thinking about certain things. And of course we can study animals to find sex differences that we again observe in humans. So these are the sex differences in the brain that we have found so far, at least the one in this article. And this is a really interesting study about what we work with. So if we study different kind of societies, if we study tribes and hunter-gatherers and a lot of different kind of societies, we find these differences in the work. So M stands for men do these kind of jobs, and F stands for females do these kind of jobs. And then N is mostly man, and G is mostly female, and E is egalitarian. So both genders do these kind of jobs. So I suggest you look at the statistics of the 185 societies, and then look at what kind of jobs does a certain gender do. And then maybe you can read the study itself too. And this is a simplified version of the graph you saw at the last slide. So as you see here, it's really clear that males do the hunting and then females do the cooking. And then you see metal work and stone work and mining, primary male jobs, while weaving and cloth making and dairy products are primary female jobs. So we see these differences. And in primitive societies, as hunter-gatherers, we really notice the difference. And this is a study by a really interesting writer, and this is a hunter-gatherer society called the Hadsta, one of the most studied hunter-gatherer society in the world. And here you can again see the clear division of the work between the genders. So in primitive society, there's a great division of labor. And unfortunately, this is without a source, so you can take it or leave it. but I think it illustrates a really great point about height and weight and strength differences between the two genders. So one gender is created to do some things that the other gender is not created to do, and vice versa. So yeah, we have these differences and we are made in different ways. That doesn't mean that one gender is better than the other gender. It just means that one gender is created to do some things that the other gender was not created to do. So of course all these differences in the sex and the differences in brains and instincts and behavior are not only observed in hunter-gatherer societies or tribe societies, they are of course also observed in a modern society. And one of the differences we can observe is the rate of imprisonment. So this is statistics from USA, and you can see that men are much more likely to get a prison sentence than females. And this is actually something that psychologists could predict by just studying the brain differences and neurotransmitter differences. So this is something we would predict because we can see that if one gender is selected to compete among each other to be selected by the other gender, then of course this gender would be more aggressive. And another interesting fact is willing to take risk is the primary factor related to income and job status. This is one of the facts I have taken not from this statistic, but from a book I've read, and this is Evolutionary Psychology and Business Sciences, edited by Gatzat. I really suggest you check it out because it's interesting if you study economy or of course if you study psychology. So this is again one of the many statistics from USA and not all over the world, and this illustrates that females are much more likely to have healthcare. And when asked, females or women or whatever you want to call this certain gender, they prioritize a lot of things besides pay. So when you ask men what they want in a job, it's usually a wage increase and higher pay and a good job status. While when you ask females, they usually choose stuff like healthcare or good friendships or sociability or a lot of time off from the job. And this is the so-called wage gap that this whole video is actually about. And if you look at married women, we actually observe this 23% wage gap. But if you look at unmarried women, you won't observe it. So women without children or unmarried women, they don't have this great wage gap between the genders. And another interesting fact, again from the Gatzat book, is that married women, they work less than unmarried women, while married men work longer hours than unmarried men. And here you see a lot of statistics on the wage gap, and you see the unadjusted statistics, and then you see the adjusted statistics. And then you can read about what they adjusted for. So of course, hours worked is the obvious thing to adjust for, because if you just compare year to year, you have some weird differences like 23%, and that's a huge difference. But if you adjust like hours worked or what kind of area you work in, then these differences will all but disappear. And of course, I highly suggest that you look up these papers and then read about how they adjusted for the wage gap and what they have to say. And then some of these papers are really, really popular and made by governments. This is to me a very interesting sex differences study. This is made by 2 Norwegian professors. They ask a bunch of kids about different questions about jobs and what they want to work with. And so here they ask them about, would you want to have a job in technology? So as you see here, in poor countries, both men and women just want the job. They want any kind of jobs available for them. But in richer country, we can actually choose what we want to work with. So if you don't want to work with technology, you don't have to work with technology. This is where we see a greater differences between the sexes. Because here the young women, really young women, they say that they don't want to work with technology, while young boys want to work with technology. So this is why we say that the sex differences are bigger in richer societies. And this is because when you have the choice, you will choose the things that you want to do and not choose the things that are forced upon you. And one of the reasons for boys wanting to work with technology is probably because it's much higher paid jobs than working with people. This is again the same study, and this is another question. So would you rather work with people or things? And as you see, girls, they want to work with people, boys want to work with things. So as you see in countries where we are freer to make the choice we want to make, we are guided by intrinsic needs. This means inner needs. So it seems like women, they want to work with people, and these are lower paid jobs. They are lower paid because they are more sought after. So more people want to work with these kind of jobs than want to work with technology. At least more people can work with these kind of jobs. So it seems like if more people want this job, then the employer can say, I'm going to pay you less because there's a lot of people who wants your job. So I'm not forced to pay you a lot of money. And this is statistics from PayScale. And so they looked at the 10 highest paid jobs. And as you can see, you have a lot of guys working here. So you have a lot of males working in these jobs. And only one of the 10 jobs is have a higher degree of females than males. So this is of course again a factor that influences the 23% wage gap. So this is again another report from BLS from USA. It's a really great source for statistics. I recommend actually that you go to the site and then try to find some statistics on gender differences. And this is a gender difference between what kind of positions you have. So what kind of work do you do? If you have office jobs, as you see here, they don't pay as much. As you see, you have more women than men in these kind of jobs. And then if you go to natural resources and construction and maintenance too, then you have a lot of men, but not that many women working. And production too, a lot of men, not that many women working there. And these are actually jobs that pay a lot of money. So as I told you, these jobs where you have mostly men, as construction and industry, they are really high paid jobs. But if you ask people about these jobs and if they are good or bad jobs, people will usually say that they are bad jobs. And the good jobs are actually the office work where you can work in safety. So just because they pay more doesn't mean that people in general will say that they are good jobs. And again, this statistic clearly illustrates why these jobs are not called good jobs, because you have a high injury rate and you have a high fatality rate. So these jobs are usually really dirty jobs. So this is a statistic you can find in any kind of country. You can see that males are much more likely to die at the job. But this is actually one of the reasons why they're paid more, because they're willing to risk their life. And this is actually a really interesting map, because what they're trying to do is adjust for the wage gap. As you can see in the upper picture, you see there's a huge wage gap. And then they try to adjust for the wage gap with education. So what kind of education do you have? What kind of years of education do you have? And as you see, the wage gap doesn't disappear right there. But at the last picture, the one at the bottom, they have adjusted for occupation and industry. And as you see on that, the wage gap actually narrows down a lot. Another factor you can look at when you compare the wage between men and women is the productivity. So how much does the single individual produce, or how much does the average male produce? And of course, if the job is physical, you could imagine that there are some differences between the genders. Or if the job is more nurturing, then you can imagine that women maybe could be better at that job. So for example, we have this statistic from Africa, when you can see that men, they produce more in the fields. But we actually don't know if this is due to there being some gender discrimination. So actually we don't know what gender produces more. We can just assume that they produce equally. But in some fields, men actually do produce more. For example, a study showed that male professors produce twice as many articles as female professors. This is again from Gatsad's book. So are these articles better? I don't know. At least we have noticed that men are more competitive in writing articles. So therefore they write more articles. And this is another interesting statistic from BLS. As you can see here, employed husbands, they spend more time on work-related activities, on leisure and sports, and then less time on household activities than women do. This is employed wives. While wives, they work less, but they do more household activities. And of course, they also do less sports. And this is again a statistic that kind of builds up on the last statistic we saw, and actually on the whole slideshow. And this is women and men taking parental leave. As you can see, women take a lot of parental leave compared to men. And especially in countries where you have really good state laws making parental leave easier to take, when you could get more money by taking parental leave, then women will take parental leave. And in countries like Sweden and the country I live in, Denmark, the government are trying somewhat to make the parental leave more equal in that men will also take it in a higher degree. So they are making some laws that state that if the man will not take his part of the parental leave, then the money cannot be transferred to the woman. And this should in principle make more men take the parental leave. But we don't know what these kind of societal governmental laws will do at the end. And this is a statistic with millions of Italians. And again, you can see the parental leave and sick leave and how the different genders take it. So we again see that women take more of the parental leave and more sick leave, but this has positive influence on the wage gap, so the wage gap increases with factors as these. And this is a questionnaire from the Great Pew Research Center. It's a really interesting site and they do a lot of questionnaires, and they are probably the most famous questionnaire site in the world. They're really good at it. So this is about parenthood and career advancement, and they asked working fathers and working mothers about if it's harder or easier to have a job if you have kids under 18. As you see, working mothers are really affected by having kids. At least they know it, and they're telling the interviewee that it's harder having a job if you have kids. While for working fathers, it's not the same kind of difficulty. And again, Pew Research Center asked mothers and fathers about what they would do for a child or family member. And as you can see here, fathers are much less likely to reduce work hours or take time off or quit the job or turn down a promotion compared to mothers. And this is again Pew Research Center. Now they are comparing mothers and fathers in the 1965 and then 2011. They mostly do research in America, USA. So as you can see, fathers work fewer hours than they used to, mothers work more hours than they used to. But both genders spend more time on childcare. And all in all, there's less housework, and this is what mothers used to do. So, as we can see, with all these different machines we have today, like different kind of washing machines and different kind of equipment to help us out in the housework, we can spend more time on our kids and we can do what we want to do. So if we want to have a job instead of doing housework, we can spend more time on that. And this is again the stats showing that having children is a huge influence on the wage gap. And this is another societal pattern. We don't have to get married today to live a life how we want to live a life. So a lot of women and a lot of men are choosing not to get married, and this of course influences the wage gap. And this is a stat from National Center of Health Statistics. It shows the age of having the first child. So of course if you're waiting with having the first child, you cannot have as many kids. And this is what we see because usually when women have a higher degree of education, they wait with having kids, so they have fewer kids all in all. And this of course again influences how you spend your time. And this is again a stat showing that we have fewer kids today than we used to. And of course with things like contraception and higher average living standard, we don't have as many kids. Today we can choose to have fewer kids but more higher quality kids. So actually we need a lot of money to have kids compete in the modern world. While 100 years ago, for example, you can have a lot of kids and then hope that some of them would survive and reproduce. And a lot of women in our modern day and age don't have any kids at all. And we have new societal problems on our hand because as you see, men are earning less than they used to. Only women are earning more than they used to. And this is because of all the factors I've talked about. So this is because of having fewer children, not getting married, and then having a much higher education than the regular man. This is a map I made from UNESCO data and CAA, the World Factbook data. So this is the expected years of education for both genders. The red are the countries where women are expected to have more years of education, and the blue countries are the countries where men are expected to have more years of education. As you can see, it's mostly in Africa when men have a higher degree of education, but still really few years compared to the Western world. And in the most Western world, women have more years of education than men. This of course will influence the wage gap in the future. And this is again data from the huge US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this again shows that the wage gap has narrowed. And this is a statistic showing that the wage difference is actually smaller in the public sector than it is in the private sector. And this lower paid public sector consists of a majority of women. So for example in Denmark, 75% of the working force in the public sector are women. And they are attracted to the healthier work-life balance that the public sector offers. And this is a statistic showing us how the genders choose their work. So actually we have a lot of more women working part-time compared to men. And as you remember, the biggest difference in the wage gap is how many hours the certain gender works. So this is where we see the difference. So remember, when you look at statistics, look at how they calculated the wage gap and what they accounted for. And this is a graph taken from an article in Danish. It's written by economist Nina Schmidt. And what she writes about here is that women and men born in 2011, if they will live to be 100, how much they will earn and how much there will be expenditure for the state during their lifetime. So as you see here, while men work longer hours, they will earn more to the state, and there will actually be an income for the state, while the woman earns less on average than the man, and she will be a bigger expenditure for the state too. So the women will all in all be an expenditure for the state, while the man will be a profit. And as Denmark already has the highest tax in the world, the highest electricity price in Europe, and a lot of things that are the most costly in Europe, the solution is probably not just as simple as raising taxes. And this is how Nina Schmidt concludes the paper. The figures reflect that Danish women, despite several decades in the labor market, still have an economic position where they are dependent on benefits. The breadwinner is no longer the family and the husband, but rather the welfare state. And these are stats showing female executive leaders by macro cultures. So as you can see here, we have many more men in executive leaders position than women. And these are people who are willing to work a lot of hours. Another interesting fact from the Get Set book is that women in these positions actually have much fewer children than the average woman, while men in these positions have much more children than average man. And this is the end of this wage gap explanation. The last of the graphs and statistics I will use, I will not explain. It's just some leftovers that I had. I will also strongly advise you to look at more statistics and then figure out why we have the wage gap. Don't just take my words for it. While I don't have any kind of agenda, I might have overseen something or got something wrong. So look at the statistics yourself and try to find out the answer. Now I will make more of these kind of videos, so I will appreciate a lot if you can give me some feedback on it.